is up, everybody? Hope you're doing well. Just give me 1 second here. I'm going to try and do something real fast. And hope this doesn't mess it up. Alright. Everybody hear the music? Everything going okay? What's up, Mad Gooch? Appreciate you popping up for Radio Trainer. How's it going? It's JB. How you doing, fam? I'm doing well. I'm doing okay, yes. Doing very well. Alien! Alien, how are you doing? Super appreciate what I received from you today. And we talked a little about that, and I look forward to sharing that with all of you on our next stream as well. I made just regular hot black tea. I'm a very much like tea, Earl Grey, hot kind of a guy. Katrina, it's really good to see you. I appreciate you popping in. Hiya, Alien. I hope I didn't miss anybody. I know there's a lot of people streaming today. And that's okay. Sick Star Wars. Hey man, I appreciate that, Darker Bunnies. I appreciate that. It's really good to see you. I love black. Oh, me too. Me too. Typically, it would be all with the sugar and whatnot. I am currently out of sugar, but it is okay to just drink it black also. Raspberry tonight. Ooh, that might be something I might have to pick up. But yeah, I started this little tradition with myself where, drinking tea on the story streams, it just feels like very appropriate too. Anybody else drinking any kind of hot beverage? Busy at work today, so I'll be lurking and listening a bit. I appreciate you being here, even lurking a bit. Berry teas are really good. I'm trying to, even after you said that, I was trying to recollect any time I've ever had like a berry flavored tea, and I really can't think of a time where I've had a berry flavored tea that wasn't like an iced tea, because I've had raspberry iced tea, which is some of my favorite, although it has to be, I prefer like the real tasting raspberries, not the artificial raspberries. So. A non-caffeinated option, that probably isn't a bad thing. I know that it is getting a little bit late over there. It's already 10 o'clock, and so sorry that it's a little bit late. Raspberry is standard in our home for sure. Excellent. Got some raspberry lovers out there. Well, if you are joining us for the first time here, of course, typically we are very much a Pokemon channel. We do open and appreciate all the artwork in Pokemon. Mondays, however, over time we have decided that my love of poetry and storytelling, that on Mondays I would solely just sit here and I would read to y'all, and y'all opted for it, so we're giving it a try. This is episode 3. We have read through Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which was our first 2 episodes, which were the 12 chapters in length. Today we are going to start the next book, which is Through the Looking Glass, which I'm very excited to get into because it's going to fill in a lot of those pieces that we didn't hear in the first book, as well as it's not a book that I remember reading too often or as often as the first. So it'll be nice to go through that journey with y'all. Honey is good. I use agave usually. Ooh, a little bit of honey. Can't go wrong with honey. You know what? I don't know if I have honey. I have syrup, though, and maple syrup is a good sweetener also. Well, I hope everybody's Monday was good. I know that it is a little bit backwards for Haley, as you are at work currently. But I hope if you did work today, that it was a great day. I hope you achieved every goal that you set out to get. And I hope that you are ready to sit here, chill, relax, ASMR some storytelling with me, Kev the Pokey Ghost. And we're going to give it another second, and then we're going to jump on into it. But I have to tell you, I've been looking forward to this all day. So I was just in Bro Rip stream, who is currently doing his monthly giveaway stream, and always great people in there. Some of them are here now. Really good in spiced tea. Yeah, exactly. Something like that. I sometimes even use it in my coffee. And call me crazy, but as long as I'm putting breakfast like syrup on my breakfast, I might as well put it in my coffee. Sorry, I love tea as much as I love coffee. Don't be sorry for that. Don't be sorry for that even a little bit. I wanted to experiment with a lot more teas as well, because I know there's just that one tea out there that doesn't need anything, doesn't need any additives. It's just good as is, and black tea is pretty much the closest thing that I've come to. But isn't that rather bland? Like black tea, that's the best tea. Agave is good too. I agree. Can everybody hear the music? Is that loud enough? Is it too loud? Just let me know. I love coffee. I don't know if it's like coffee so much as it is like caffeine. Just having anything with the caffeine. Exactly. Exactly. You get it. You get it. Of course, it would probably be important to let you all know that the author of the book was Lewis Carroll, for those that don't know. And it's a very, very old book. And as always, we are going to try our best to get into it and keep going. I did mark it kind of on our same track as our last two streams, which was about 6 chapters. So we're going to try and get through at least the first 6 chapters and through the Looking Glass today. Of course, the time frame will be about the same as well, so we won't push it too well. We'll take a gauge when I feel the gauge is needed. But yeah, I hope you all enjoy, and I appreciate you joining me tonight on Monday. Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There by Lewis Carroll. Alright. Chapter 1. Looking Glass House. One thing was certain, that the white kitten had nothing to do with it. It was the black kitten's fault entirely. For the white kitten had been having its face washed by the old cat for the last quarter of an hour, and bearing it pretty well considering. So you see that it couldn't have been at any hand in the mischief. The way Dinah washed her children's faces was this. First, she held the poor thing down by its ear with one paw, and then with the other paw, she rubbed its face all over, the wrong way. Beginning at the nose, and just now, as I said, she was hard at work on the white kitten, which was lying quite still and trying to purr, no doubt feeling that it was all meant for its good. But the black kitten had been finished with earlier in the afternoon, and so while Alice was sitting curled up in the corner of the great armchair, half talking to herself and half asleep, the kitten had been having a grand game of romps with the ball of worsen Alice had been trying to wind up, and had been rolling it up and down to let it all come undone again. And there it was, spread over the hearth rug, all knots and tangles, with the kitten running after its own tail in the middle. "Oh, you wicked, wicked little thing," cried Alice, catching up the kitten and giving it a little kiss to make it understand that it was in disgrace. "Really, Dinah ought to have taught you better manners. You ought, Dinah. You know you ought," she added, looking reproachfully at the old cat and speaking in a cross of voice as she could manage. And then she scrambled back to her armchair, taking the kitten and the worsen with her, and began winding up the ball again. But she didn't get on very fast, as she was talking all the time, sometimes to the kitten and sometimes to herself. Kitty sat very demurely on her knee, pretending to watch the progress of the winding, and now and then putting out one paw and gently touching the ball as if it would be glad to help if it might. "Do you know what tomorrow is, Kitty?" Alice began. "You have guessed if you have been up in the window with me. Only Dinah was making you tidy, so you couldn't. I was watching the boys getting in sticks for the bonfire, and it wants plenty of sticks, Kitty. Only it got so cold, and it snowed, so they had to leave off. Never mind, Kitty. We'll go see the bonfire tomorrow." Here Alice wound 2 or 3 turns of the worsen around the kitty's neck, just to see how it would look. This led to a scramble, in which the ball rolled down upon the floor, and yards of it got unwound again. Do you know, I was so angry, Kitty, Alice went on as soon as they were comfortably settled again. When I saw all the mischief you have been doing, I was very nearly opening the window and putting you out into the snow. And you'd have deserved it, you little mischievous darling. What have you got to say for yourself? Now don't interrupt me, she went on, holding up one finger. I'm going to tell you all your faults. Number 1, you squeaked twice while Dinah was washing your face this morning. Now you can't deny it, Kitty, I heard you. What's that you say? Pretending that the kitten was speaking. Her paw went into your eye? Well, that's your fault for keeping your eyes open. If you'd shut them tight up, it wouldn't have happened. Now don't make any more excuses, but listen. Number 2, you pulled Snowdrop away by the tail just as I had put down the saucer of milk before her. What? You were thirsty, were you? How do you know she wasn't thirsty too? Now for number 3. You unwound every bit of the worsted while I wasn't looking. That's 3 faults, Kitty. And you've not been punished for any of them. You know I'm saving up all your punishments for Wednesday week. Suppose they had all saved up my punishment, she went on, talking more to herself than the kitten. What would they do at the end of the year? I should be sent to prison, I suppose. When the day came, or let me see, suppose each punishment was to be going without a dinner. Then, when the miserable day came, I should have to go without 50 dinners at once. Well, I shouldn't mind that much. I'd far rather go without them than eat them. Do you hear the snow against the window panes, Kitty? How nice and soft it sounds. Just as if someone was kissing the window all over the outside. I wonder if the snow loves the trees and the fields, that it kisses them so gently. And then it covers them up snug, you know, with the white quilt. And perhaps it says, go to sleep, darlings, till the summer comes again. And when they wake up in the summer, Kitty, they dress themselves all in green and dance about, whenever the wind blows. Oh, that's very pretty, cried Alice, dropping the ball of worsted to clap her hands, and I do so wish it was true. I'm sure the woods look sleepy in the autumn, when the leaves are getting brown. Kitty, can you play chess? Now, don't smile, my dear. I'm asking it seriously, because when we were playing just now, you watched just as if you understood it. And when I said, check, you purred. Well, it was a nice check, Kitty, and really, I might have won if it hadn't been for the nasty night that came wriggling down among my pieces. Kitty, dear, let's pretend. And here I wish I could tell you half the things Alice used to say, beginning with her favorite phrase, let's pretend. She had quite a long argument with her sisters only the day before, all because Alice began with, let's pretend we're kings and queens. And her sisters, who liked being very exact, had argued that they couldn't because there were only 2 of them. And Alice had been reduced at last to say, well, you can be one of them, then, and I'll be the rest. And once she had really frightened her old nurse by shouting suddenly in her ear, Nurse, do let's pretend that I'm a hungry hyena and you're a bone. But this is taking us away from Alice's speech to the kitten. Let's pretend that you're the Red Queen, Kitty. Do you know, I think if you sat up, folded your arms, you'd look exactly like her. Now do try, there's a dear. And Alice got the Red Queen off the table and set it up before the kitten was a model for it to imitate. However, the thing didn't succeed, principally, Alice said, because the kitten wouldn't fold his arms properly. So to punish it, she held it up to the looking glass, that it might see how sulky it was. And if you're not good directly, she added, I'll put you through into the looking glass house. How would you like that? Now, if you'll only attend, Kitty, and not talk so much, I'll tell you all my ideas about Looking Glass House. First, there's a room you can see through the glass. That's just the same as our drawing room. Only the things go the other way. And can see all of it when I get up on the chair, all but the little bit just behind the fireplace. Oh, I do so wish I could see that bit. I want so much to know whether there's A fire in the winter. You never can tell, unless our fire smokes. And then smoke comes up in the room too, but that may be the only pretense. Just to make it look as if they had a fire. Well then, the books are something like our books, only the words go the wrong way. I know that because I've held up one of our books to the glass, and they hold up one in the other room. How would you like to live in Looking Glass House, Kitty? I wonder if they'd give you milk in there. Perhaps Looking Glass milk isn't as good to drink. But, oh, Kitty, now we've come to the passage. You can just see a little peep of the passage in Looking Glass House if you leave the door of our drawing room wide open. And it's very like our passage as far as you can see, only it may be quite different on beyond. Oh, Kitty, how nice it would be if we could only go through into Looking Glass House. I'm sure it's got, such beautiful things in it. Let's pretend there's a way of getting through into it somehow, Kitty. Let's pretend the glass has got all soft like gauze so that we can get through. Why, it's turning into sort of mist now, I declare. It'll be easy to get through. She was up on the chimney piece while she said this, though she hardly knew how she got there. And certainly the glass was beginning to melt away, just like a bright silvery mist. In another moment, Alice was through the glass and had jumped lightly down into Looking Glass room. The very first thing she did was to look whether there was a fire in the fireplace, and she was quite pleased to find that there was a real one, blazing away as brightly as the one she had left behind. So I shall be warm here as I was in the old room, thought Alice, warmer in fact, because there'll be no one here to scold me away from the fire. Oh, what fun it'll be when they come see through the glass in here and can't get at me. Then she began to look about, and noticed that what could be seen from the old room was quite common and uninteresting, but that all the rest was as different as possible. For instance, the pictures on the wall next to the fire seemed to be all alive, and the very clock on the chimney piece, you can only see the back of it in the looking glass, had got the face of a little old man and grinned at her. They don't keep this room so tidy as the other, Alice thought to herself, as she noticed several of the chessmen down on the hearth among the cinders. But in another moment, with a little "oh" of surprise, she was down on her hands and knees watching them. The chessmen were walking about, 2 and 2. "Here are the Red King and the Red Queen," Alice said in a whisper for fear of frightening them. "And there are White King and the White Queen sitting on the edge of the shovel. And here are 2 castles walking arm in arm. I don't think they can hear me," she went on as she put her head down closer, "and I'm nearly sure they can't see me. I feel somehow as if I'm getting invisible." Here something began squeaking on the table behind Alice, and made her turn her head just in time to see one of the white pawns roll over and began kicking. She watched it with great curiosity to see what would happen next. "It is the voice of my child!" the White Queen cried out, as she rushed past the king so violently that she knocked him over among the cinders. "My precious Lily, my imperial kitten!" And she began scrambling wildly up the side of the fender. "Imperial fiddlestick," said the king, rubbing his nose, which had been hurt by the fall. He had a right to be a little annoyed with the queen, for he was covered with ashes from head to foot. Alice was very anxious to be of use, and as the poor little Lily was nearly screaming herself into a fit, she hastily picked up the queen and set her on the table by the side of her noisy little daughter. The queen gasped and sat down. The rapid journey through the air had quite taken her breath away, and for a minute or two she could do nothing but hug little Lily in silence. As soon as she had recovered her breath a little, she called out to the White King, who was sitting sulkily among the ashes. "Mind the volcano?" "What volcano?" said the king, looking up anxiously into the fire, as if he thought that was the most likely place to find one. "Blew me up," panted the queen. who was still a little out of breath. "Mind you come up the regular way. Don't get blown up." Alice watched the White King as he slowly struggled up from bar to bar, till at last she said, "Why, you'll be hours and hours getting to the table at that rate. I'd far better help you, hadn't I?" But the king took no notice of the question. It was clear that he could neither hear her nor see her. So Alice picked him up very gently and lifted him across more slowly than she had lifted the queen, that she mightn't take his breath away. But before she put him on the table, she thought she might as well dust him off a little. He was so covered with ash. She said afterwards that she had never seen in all her life such a face as the king made, when he found himself held in the air by an invisible hand and being dusted. He was far too much astonished to cry out, but his eyes and his mouth went on getting larger and larger and rounder, till her hand shook with such laughing that she nearly let him drop upon the floor. "Oh, please don't make such faces, my dear," she cried, quite forgetting the king couldn't hear her. "You make me laugh so that I can hardly hold you. And don't keep your mouth so wide open, all the ashes will get into it. There, now I think you're tidy enough," she added, as she smoothed his hair and set him upon the table near the queen. The king immediately fell flat on his back and lay perfectly still, and Alice was a little alarmed at what she had done, and went round the room to see if she could find any water to throw over him. However, she could find nothing but a bottle of ink, and when she got back with it, she found he had recovered, and he and the queen were talking together in a frightened whisper, so low that Alice could hardly hear what they said. The king was saying, "I assure you, my dear, I turned cold to the very ends of my whiskers." To which the queen replied, "You haven't got any whiskers." "The horror of that moment," the king went on, "I shall never forget." "You will, though," the queen said, "if you don't make a memorandum of it." Alice looked on with great interest as the king took an enormous memorandum book out of his pocket and began writing. A sudden thought struck her, and she took hold of the end of the pencil, which came some way over her shoulder, and began writing for him. The poor king looked puzzled and unhappy, and struggled with the pencil for some time without saying anything. But Alice was too strong for him, and at last he panted out, "My dear, I really must get a thinner pencil. I can't manage this one a bit. It writes all manner of things that I don't intend." "A manner of things?" said the queen, looking over the book, in which Alice had put, "The White King is sliding down the poker. He bounces very badly." "That's not a memorandum of your feelings." There was a book lying near Alice on the table, and while she sat watching the White King, for she was still a little anxious about him, and had the ink all ready to throw over him in case he fainted again, she turned over the leaves to find some part that she could read, "for it's all in some language I don't know," she said to herself. It was like this. It is gibberish backward text. She puzzled over this for some time, but at last a bright thought struck her. "Why, it's Looking-Glass book, of course, and if I hold it up to the glass, the words all go the right way again." This is what the poem that Alice read. Oh, the Jabberwocky. 'Twas brilling in the slithy troves, did gyre and grimble in the wave. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome rath sow grade. Beware the Jabberwocky, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the jubjub bird, and shun the frumerous bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand, long time that maxim foe he sought. So rest he by the tantum tree, and stood a while in thought. And as in uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock, his eyes aflame, came whiffling through the trudgy wood, and borrowed it as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through, the vorpal's blade went snicker-snack. He left it dead with his head, and with his head he went galumping back. "And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. O Frabishday, Calloo, Calais," he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brilling in the slithy troves, did gray and gimble in the wade. All mimsy in the burrow groves, in the mome rath sow grade. "It seems very pretty," she said, when she had finished, "but it's rather hard to understand." You see, she didn't like to confess even to herself that she couldn't make it out at all. "Somehow it seems to fill my head with ideas, only I don't exactly know what they are. However, somebody killed something, that's clear, at that rate. But oh," thought Alice, suddenly jumping up, "if I don't make haste, I shall have to go back through the looking-glass before I've seen what the rest of the house is like. Let's have a look at the garden first." She was out of the room in a moment, and ran downstairs. Or at least, it wasn't exactly running, but a new invention for getting downstairs quickly and easily, as Alice said to herself. She just kept the tips of her fingers on the handrails and floated gently down without even touching the stairs with her feet. Then she floated through the hall, and would have gone straight out the door in the same way if she hadn't caught a hold of the doorpost. She was getting a little giddy with so much floating in the air, and was rather glad to find herself walking again in a natural way. Whew, good start, good start. Lori! Hope you're doing well, Lori. It's the end of chapter 1, and now my tea should be brewed. Appreciate you guys letting me get the reading rest out. Oh yeah, that's the stuff. That's good tea. Hope everybody's doing well tonight. I know I've read the Jabberwocky on my other streams too. It's one of my favorites because it's so bonkers. Oh, thanks. Excellent. I love that. I love that. I love that. Getting right into it. And one of my favorite parts in any version of Alice is always going to be the Garden of Live Flowers. Excellent. I'm going to do one more. And I just want to give you all a subtle thank you all. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate you. I kind of got to remember my camera placement. The Garden of Live Flowers. I should see the garden far better, said Alice to herself, if I could get to the top of that hill. And here's a path that leads straight to it. At least, no, it doesn't do that. After going a few yards along the path and turning several sharp corners. But I suppose it will at last. But how curiously it twists. It's more like a corkscrew than a path. Well, this turn goes back to the hill, I suppose. No, it doesn't. This goes straight back to the house. Well then, I'll try the other way. And so she did, wandering up and down and trying to turn after turn, but always coming back to the house. Do what she would. Indeed, once, when she turned a corner rather more quickly than usual, she ran against it before she could stop herself. It's no use talking about it, Alice said, looking up. Looking up at the house, pretending it was arguing with her. I'm not going in again yet. I know I should have to get through the looking glass again, back into the old room, and there'll be an end to all my adventures. So, resolutely, turning her back upon the house, she set out once more down the path, determined to keep straight on till she got to the hill. For a few minutes, all went on well, and she was just saying, I really shall do it this time, when the path gave a sudden twist and shook itself, as she described it afterwards. And in the next moment, she found herself actually walking in at the door. Oh, it's too bad, she cried. I never saw such a house for getting in the way, never. However, there was a hill full in sight, so there was nothing to be done but start again. This time, she came upon a large flower bed with a border of daisies and a willow tree growing in the middle. Oh, Tiger Lily, said Alice, addressing herself to no one that was waving gracefully about in the wind. I wish you could talk. We can talk, said the Tiger Lily. When there's nobody worth talking to. Oh, when there's anybody worth talking to. Alice was so astonished that she couldn't speak for a moment. It quite seemed to take her breath away. At length, as the tiger lily went on waving about, she spoke again, in a timid voice, almost in a whisper. And can all the flowers talk? As well as you can, said the tiger lily, and a great deal louder. It isn't manners for us to begin, you know, said the rose. And I really was wondering when you'd speak, said I to myself. Her face has got some sense to it, though it's not a clever one. Still, you're the right color, and that goes a long way. I don't care about the color, the tiger lily remarked. If only her petals curled up a little more, she'd be all right. Alice didn't like being criticized, so she began asking questions. Aren't you sometimes frightened at being planted out here with nobody to take care of you? There's the tree in the middle, said the rose. What else is it good for? But what could it do? If any danger came, Alice asked. It could bark, said the rose. It says bow wow, cried a daisy. That's why its branches are called boughs. Called boughs. Didn't you know that? Cried another daisy, and here they all began shouting together, till the air seemed quite full of little shrill voices. Silence, every one of you, cried the tiger lily, waving itself passionately from side to side and trembling with excitement. They know I can't get at them, it panted, bending its quivering head towards Alice, or they wouldn't dare do it. Never mind, Alice said in a soothing tone, and stooping down to the daisies who were just beginning again, she whispered, If you don't hold your tongues, I'll pick you. There was silence in a moment, and several of the pink daisies turned white. That's right, said the tiger lily. The daisies are the worst of all. When one speaks, they all begin together, and it's enough to make one wither to hear the way they go on. How is it you can all talk so nicely? Alice said, hoping to get it into a better temper by the compliment. I've been in many gardens before, but none of the flowers could talk. Put your hand down and feel the ground, said the tiger lily, and you'll know why. Alice did so. It's very hard, she said, but I don't see what that has to do with it. In most gardens, the tiger lily said, they make the beds too soft, so that the flowers are always asleep. This sounded a very good reason, said Alice, and Alice was quite pleased to know it. I never thought of that before, she said. It's my opinion that you never think at all, the rose said in a rather severe tone. I never saw anybody that looked stupider, a violet said, so suddenly that Alice quite jumped, for it hadn't spoken before. Hold your tongue, cried the tiger lily, as if you ever saw anybody. You keep your head under the leaves and snore away there, till you know no more what's going on in the world than if you were a bud. Are there any more people in the garden besides me? Alice said, not choosing to notice the rose's last remark. There's one other flower in the garden that can move about like you, said the rose. I wonder how you do it. You're always wondering, said the tiger lily. But she's more bushy than you are. Is she like me? Alice asked eagerly, for the thought crossed her mind, there's another little girl in the garden somewhere. Well, she has the same awkward shape as you, the rose said, but she's redder, and her petals are shorter, I think. They're done up close like a dahlia, said the tiger lily, not tumbled about like yours. But that's not your fault, the rose added kindly. You're beginning to fade, you know. And then no one can't help one's petals getting a little untidy. Alice didn't like this idea at all, so to change the subject, she asked, does she ever come out here too? I dare say. You'll see her soon, said the rose. She's one of the kind that has 9 spikes, you know. Where does she wear them? Alice asked with some curiosity. Why, all around her head, of course, the rose replied. I was wondering you hadn't got some too. I thought it was a regular rule. She's coming, cried the larkspur. I hear her footsteps, thump, thump, along the gravel walk. Alice looked around eagerly and found that it was a the Red Queen. "She's grown a good deal," was her first remark. She had indeed. When Alice first found her in the ashes, she had only been 3 inches high, and here she was, half a head taller than Alice herself. "It's the fresh air that does it," says the Rose. Wonderfully fine air it is out here." "I think I'll go and meet her," said Alice. For though the flowers were interesting enough, she felt it would be far grander to have a talk with a real queen. "You can't possibly do that," said the Rose. "I should advise you to walk the other way." This sounded nonsense to Alice, so she said nothing. She set off at once towards the Red Queen. To her surprise, she lost sight of her in a moment and found herself walking in at the front door again. A little provoked, she drew back, and after looking everywhere for the Queen, whom she spied out at last a long way off, she thought she would try the plan this time of walking in the opposite direction. It succeeded beautifully. She had not been walking a minute before she found herself face to face with the Red Queen, and full in sight of the hill she had been so long aiming at. "Where do you come from?" said the Red Queen. "And where are you going? Look up, speak nicely, and don't twiddle your fingers at all." Alice attended to all these directions and explained as well as she could that she had lost her way. I don't know what you mean by your way," said the Queen. "All the ways about here belong to me." "But why did you come out here at all?" she added in a kinder tone. "Curtsy while you're thinking what to say. It saves time." Alice wondered a little at this, but she was much too in awe of the Queen to disbelieve it. "I'll try it when I go home," she thought to herself, "the next time I'm a little late for dinner." "It's time for you to answer now," the Queen said, looking at her watch. "Open your mouth a little wider when you speak, and always say 'Your Majesty.'" "I only want to see what the garden is like, Your Majesty." "That's right," said the Queen, patting her on the head, which Alice didn't like at all. "Though when you say garden, I've seen gardens compared to which this would be a wilderness." Alice didn't dare argue the point, but went on. "And I thought I'd try to find my way to the top of that hill." "When you say hill," the Queen interrupted, "I could show you hills in comparison with which you'd call that a valley." "No, I shouldn't," said Alice, surprised and contradicting her at last. "A hill can't be a valley, you know. That would be nonsense." The Red Queen shook her head. "You may call it nonsense if you like," she said, "but I've heard nonsense, compared with which that would be as sensible as a dictionary." Alice curtsied again, as she was afraid from the Red Queen's tone that she was a little offended, and they walked on in silence till they got to the top of the little hill. For some minutes, Alice stood without speaking, looking out in all directions over the country, and a most curious country it was. There were a number of tiny little brooks running straight across it from side to side, and the ground between was divided up into squares by a number of little green hedges that reached from brook to brook. "I declare it's marked out just like a large chessboard," Alice said at last. "There ought to be some men moving about somewhere, and so there are," she added in a tone of delight, and her heart began to beat quick with excitement as she went on. "It's a great huge game of chess that's being played all over the world. If this is the world at all, you know. Oh, what fun it is! How I wish I was one of them. I wouldn't mind being a pawn, if I only I might join. Though, of course, I should like to be a queen best." She glanced rather shyly at the real Queen as she said this, but her companion only smiled pleasantly and said, "That's easily managed. You can be the White Queen's pawn, if you like, as Lily's too young to play, and you're the second square to begin with. When you get to the 8th square, you'll be a queen." Just at this moment, somehow or another, they began to run. Alice never could quite make out, in thinking it over afterwards, how it was that they began. All she remembers is that they were running hand in hand, and the Queen went so fast that it was all she could to keep up with her. And still the Queen kept crying, "Faster, faster!" But Alice felt she could not go faster, though she had no breath left to say so. The most curious part of the thing was that the trees and all the other things around them never changed their places at all. However fast they went, they never seemed to pass anything. I wonder if all the things move along with us, thought poor puzzled Alice. And the Queen seemed to guess her thoughts, for she cried, "Faster, don't try to talk." Not that Alice had any idea of doing that. She felt as if she would never be able to talk again. She was getting so much out of breath, and still the Queen cried, "Faster, faster," and dragged her along. "Are we nearly there?" Alice managed to pan out at last. "Nearly there," the Queen repeated. "Why, we passed it 10 minutes ago. Faster!" And they ran on for a time in silence, with the wind whistling in Alice's ear, and almost blowing her hair off her head, she fancied. "Now, now!" cried the Queen. "Faster, faster!" And they went so fast that at last they seemed to skim through the air, hardly touching the ground with their feet, till suddenly, just as Alice was getting quite exhausted, they stopped, and she found herself sitting on the ground, breathless and giddy. The Queen propped her up against the tree and said kindly, "You may rest a little now." Alice looked around her in great surprise. "Why, I do believe we've been under this tree the whole time. Everything is just as it was." "Of course it is," said the Queen. "What would you have it?" "Well, in our country," said Alice, still panting a little, "you generally get to somewhere else if you ran very fast for a long time, as we've been doing." "A slow sort of country," said the Queen. "Now here, you see, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. If you want to get somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast as that." "I'd rather not try that, please," said Alice. "I'm quite content to stay here. Only I am so hot and thirsty." "I know what you'd like," the Queen said, good-naturedly, taking a little box out of her pocket. "Have a biscuit." Alice thought it would not be civil to say no, though it wasn't at all what she wanted. So she took it and ate it as well as she could, and it was very dry, and she thought she had never been so nearly choked in all her life. "While you're refreshing yourself," said the Queen, "I'll just take measurements." And she took a ribbon out of her pocket, marked in inches, and began measuring the ground and sticking little pegs in here and there. "At the end of 2 yards," she said, putting in a peg to mark the distance, "I shall give you your directions. Have another biscuit?" "No, thank you," said Alice. "One's quite enough." "Thirst quenched, I hope," said the Queen. Alice did not know what to say to this, but luckily the Queen did not wait for an answer, but went on. "At the end of 3 yards I shall repeat them, for fear of you forgetting them. At the end of 4 I shall say goodbye, and at the end of 5 I shall go." She had got all the pegs put in by this time, and Alice looked on with great interest as she returned to the tree, and then began slowly walking down the row. At the 2-yard peg she faced around and said, "A pawn goes 2 squares in its first move, you know, so you'll go very quickly through the 3rd square, by railway, I should think, and you'll find yourself on the 4th square in no time. Well, that square belongs to Tweedledum and Tweedledee. The 5th is mostly water. The 6th belongs to Humpty Dumpty. But you make no remark?" I didn't know I had to make one just then," Alice faltered out. "You should have said," the Queen went on in a tone of grave reproof. "It's extremely kind of you to tell me all of this. However, well, suppose it said, the 7th square is all forest. However, one of the knights will show you the way. And in the English square, and in the 8th square, we shall be queens together, and it's all feasting and fun." Alice got up and curtsied and sat down again. At the next peg, the Queen turned again, and this time she said, "Speak in French when you can't think of the English for a thing. Turn out your toes as you walk, and remember who you are." She did not wait for Alice to curtsy this time, but walked on quickly to the next peg, where she turned for a moment to say, "Goodbye," and then hurried on to the last. How it happened, Alice never knew, but exactly as she came to the last peg, she was gone. Whether she vanished into the air, or whether she ran quickly into the wood. And she can run very fast, thought Alice. There was no way of guessing. But she was gone, and Alice began to remember that she was a pawn, and that it should be time for her to move. Would soon be time for her to move. Chapter 2. Denzel. 70 odd chilling in here, listening to me read. Super appreciate you guys being here. Hope everyone's having a great night. Dr. Bunnies. Now I'm starting to think that this isn't Wonderland at all. Excellent. I love that. Yes, this is definitely a stream designed for lurking. Not an interactive stream. Not to say you can't interact with each other, but I appreciate y'all being here, and I'm glad I can do this for y'all, because I get to hear the book too, kinda, right? Radio trainer. I appreciate you being here, man. Alright, moving into chapter 3. Looking glass insects. Really look forward to. Aw, so do I. So do I, and I appreciate that. I really do. Of course, the first thing to do was make a grand survey of the country she was going to travel through. It's something very like learning geography, thought Alice, as she stood on tiptoe in hopes of being able to see a little further. Principal rivers, there are none. Principal mountains, I'm on the only one, but I don't think it's got any name. Principal towns, why, what are those creatures making honey down there? They can't be bees. Nobody's ever saw bees a mile off, you know. And for some time she stood silent, watching one of them that was bustling about among the flowers, poking its proboscis into them, just as if it were a regular bee, thought Alice. However, this was anything but regular bee, in fact. It was an elephant. As Alice soon found out, through the idea quite took her breath away at first. And what enormous flowers they must be, was her next idea. Something like cottages with the roofs taken off and stalks put onto them. And what quantities of honey they must make. I think I'll go down and... No, I won't go just yet, she went on, checking herself just as she was beginning to run down the hill and trying to find some excuse for turning shy so suddenly. I'll never do to go down among them without a good long branch to brush them away. And what fun it'll be when they ask me how I like my walk. I shall say, oh, I liked it well enough. Here came her favorite little toss of the head. Only it was so dusty and hot, and the elephants did tease so. I think I'll go down the other way, she said after a pause, and perhaps I may visit the elephants later on. Besides, I do so want to get into the third square. So with this excuse, she ran down the hill and jumped over the first of the 6 little brooks. Tickets, please, said the guard, putting his head in at the window. In a moment everybody was holding out a ticket. They were about the same size as the people, and quite seemed to fill the carriage. Now then, show your ticket, child, the guard went on, looking angrily at Alice, and a great many voices all said together, like a chorus of a song, thought Alice, don't keep him waiting, child. Why, his time is worth £1,000 a minute. I'm afraid I haven't got one, Alice said in a frightened tone. There wasn't a ticket office where I came from. And again a chorus of voice went on. There wasn't a room for one when she came from. The land there is worth £1,000 an inch. Don't make excuses, said the guard. You should have bought one from the engine driver. And once more the chorus of voices went on with, the man that drives the engine. Why, the smoke alone is worth £1,000 a puff. Alice thought to herself, then there's no use in speaking. The voices didn't join in this time, and she hadn't spoken, but to her great surprise, they all thought in chorus. I hope you understand what thinking in chorus means, for I must confess that I don't. Better say nothing at all. Luggage is worth £1,000 a word. I shall dream about £1,000 tonight. I know I shall, thought Alice. All this time, the guard was looking at her, first through a telescope, then through a microscope, and then through an opera glass. At last he said, "You're traveling the wrong way," and shut up the window and went away. "So young a child," said the gentleman sitting opposite to her. He was dressed in white paper. "Ought to know which way she's going, even if she doesn't know her own name." A goat that was sitting next to the gentleman in white shut his eyes and said in a loud voice, "She ought to know her way to the ticket office, even if she doesn't know her alphabet." There was a beetle sitting next to the goat. It was a very queer carriage full of passengers altogether, and as a rule seemed to be that they should all speak in turn. He went on with, She'll have to go back from here as luggage." Alice couldn't see who was sitting beyond the beetle, but a hoarse voice spoke next. "Change engines," it said, and there was a choked and an obliged to leave off. And there it choked and was obliged to leave off. "Sounds like a horse," Alice thought to herself in an extremely small voice. Close to her ear said, "You might make a joke on that. Something about a horse and a horse, you know." Then a very gentle voice in the distance said, "She must be labeled Lass with Care, you know." And after that, other voices went on. "What a number of people there are in this carriage," thought Alice, saying, "She must go by post, as she's got a head on her. She must be sent as a message by a telegraph. She must draw the train herself the rest of the way," and so on. But the gentleman dressed in white paper leaned forward and whispered in her ear, "Never mind what they all say, my dear, but take a return ticket every time the train stops." "Indeed I shan't," Alice said rather impatiently. "I don't belong to this railway journey at all. I was in a wood just now, and I wish I could get back there." "You might make a joke on that," said the little voice close to her ear. "Something about you would if you could, you know." "Don't tease so," said Alice, looking about in vain to see where the voice came from. "If you're so anxious to have a joke made, why don't you make one yourself?" The little voice sighed deeply. It was very unhappy, evidently, and Alice would have said something pitying to comfort it, if it would only sigh like other people, she thought. But this was such a wonderfully small sigh that she wouldn't have heard it at all if it hadn't come quite close to her ear. The consequence of this was that it tickled her ear very much, and quite took off her thoughts from the unhappiness of the poor little creature. "I know you are a friend," the little voice went on, "a dear friend, and an old friend, and who won't hurt me, though I am an insect." "What kind of insect?" Alice inquired, a little anxiously. What she really wanted to know was whether it could sting or not, but she thought this wouldn't quite be a civil question to ask. "What? Then you don't—" the little voice began, when it was drowned by a shrill scream from the engine, and everybody jumped up in alarm, Alice among the rest. The horse, who had put his head out of the window, quietly drew it in and said, "It's only a brook we have to jump over." Everybody seemed satisfied with this, though Alice felt a little nervous at the idea of trains jumping at all. "However, it'll take us into the fourth square. That's some comfort," she said to herself. In another moment, she felt the carriage rise straight up into the air, and in her fright she caught at the thing nearest to her hand, which happened to be the goat's beard. But the beard seemed to melt away as she touched it, and she found herself sitting quietly under a tree, while the gnat, for that was the insect she had been talking to, was balancing itself on a twig just over her head and fanning her with its wings. "It certainly is a very large gnat, about the size of a chicken," Alice thought. Still, she couldn't feel nervous with it, after they had just been talking together so long. "Then you don't like all insects?" the gnat went on, as quietly as nothing had happened. "I like them when they can talk," Alice said. "None of them ever talk where I'm from." "What sort of insects do you rejoice in, where you come from?" the gnat inquired. "I don't rejoice in insects at all," Alice explained, "because I'm rather afraid of them, at least the large kinds. But I can tell you the names of some of them." "Of course they answer to their names," the gnat remarked carelessly. "I never knew them to do it." "What's the use of having names," the gnat said, "if they won't answer to them?" No use to them, said Alice, but it's useful to people that name them, I suppose. If not, why do things have names at all? I can't say, the gnat replied. Further on, in the wood down there, they've got no names. However, go on with your list of insects. You're wasting time. Well, there's a horsefly, Alice began, counting off the names on all her fingers. All right, said the gnat. Halfway up that bush, you'll see a rocking horsefly, if you look. It's made entirely of wood and gets about by swinging itself from branch to branch. What does it live on? Alice asked with great curiosity. Sap and sawdust, said the gnat. Go on with the list. Alice looked at the rocking horsefly with great interest, and made up her mind that it must have been just repainted. It looked so bright and sticky, and then she went on. And there's the dragonfly. Look on that branch above your head, said the gnat, and there you will find a snapdragonfly. Its body is made of plum pudding, its wings of holly leaves, and its head of raisin burning in the brandy. And what does it live on? Alice asked, as before. Frumenity and mince pie, said the gnat replied, and it makes its nest in the Christmas box. And then there's the butterfly, Alice went on after she had taken a good look at the insect with its head on fire and had thought to herself, I wonder if it's the reason insects are so fond of flying into candles, because they want to turn into snapdragonflies. Crawling at your feet, said the gnat. Alice drew her feet back in some alarm. You may observe bread and butterfly. Its wings are thin slices of bread and butter, its body is crust, and its head is a lump of sugar. And what does it live on? Weak tea with cream in it. A new difficulty came to Alice's head. Supposing it couldn't find any, she suggested. Then it would die, of course. But that must happen very often, Alice remarked thoughtfully. It always happens, said the gnat. After this, Alice was silent for a minute or two, pondering. The gnat amused itself meanwhile by humming round and round her head. At last it settled again and remarked, I suppose you don't want to lose your name. No, indeed, Alice said, a little anxiously. And yet I don't know. The gnat went on in a careless tone. Only think how convenient it would be if you could manage to go home without it. For instance, if the governess wanted to call you to your lessons, she would call out, come here, and there she would have to leave off, because there wouldn't be any name for her to call. And of course you wouldn't have to go, you know. That would never do, I'm sure, said Alice. The governess would never think of excusing me lessons for that. If she couldn't remember my name, she'd call me Miss, as the servants do. Well, if she said Miss, and didn't say anything more, the gnat remarked, of course you'd miss your lesson. That's a joke. I wish you had made it. Why do you wish I had made it? Alice asked. It's a very bad one. But the gnat only sighed deeply, while 2 large tears came rolling down his cheeks. You shouldn't make jokes, Alice said, if it makes you so unhappy. Then came another of those melancholy little sighs. And this time the poor gnat really seemed to have sighed itself away, for when Alice looked up there was nothing whatever to be seen on the twig. And, as she was getting quite chilly with sitting still so long, she got up and walked on. She very soon came to an open field, with a wood on the other side of it. It looked much darker than the last wood, and Alice felt a little timid about going into it. However, on second thoughts, she made up her mind to go on, for I certainly won't go back, she thought to herself, and this is the only way to the 8th square. This must be the wood, she said thoughtfully to herself, where things have no names. I wonder what'll become of my name when I go in. I shouldn't like to lose it at all, because they'd have to give me another, and it would almost be certain to be an ugly one. But then the fun would be trying to find the creature that had got my old name. That's just like the advertisements, you know, when people lose dogs. Answers to the name of Dash, had on a brass collar. Just fancy calling everything you met Alice, till one of them answered. Only they wouldn't answer at all if they were wise. She was rambling on in this way while she reached the wood. It looked very cool and shady. While at any rate, it's a great comfort, she said as she stopped under the trees. after being so hot to get into the what? She went on, rather surprised at not being able to think of the word. I mean, to get under this, you know, putting her hand on the trunk of the tree. What does it call itself, I wonder? I do believe it's got no name. Why, to be sure it hasn't. She stood silent for a minute, thinking. Then she suddenly began again. Then it really has happened after all. And now who am I? I will remember if I can. I'm determined to do it. But being determined didn't help her much, and all she could say after a great deal of puzzling was, L. I know it begins with an L. Just then a fawn came wandering by. It looked at Alice with its large, gentle eyes, but didn't seem at all frightened. Here then, Alice said as she held out her hand and tried to stroke it, but it only started back a little, and then stood looking at her. What do you call yourself? The fawn said at last, such a soft, sweet voice it had. I wish I knew, thought poor Alice. She answered rather sadly, Nothing just now. Think again, it said, that won't do. Alice thought, but nothing came of it. Please, would you tell me what you call yourself? She said timidly. I think that might help a little. I'll tell you, if you'll come on a little further on, the fawn said. I can't remember here. So they walked on together through the wood, Alice with her arms clasped lovingly around the soft neck of the fawn, till they came out to another open field, and here the fawn gave a sudden bound into the air and shook itself free of Alice's arm. I'm a fawn, it cried out in a voice of delight, and dear me, you're a human child. A sudden look of alarm came into its beautiful brown eyes, and in another moment it had darted away at full speed. Alice stood looking after it, almost ready to cry with vexation at having lost her dear little fellow traveler so suddenly. However, I know my name now, she said. That's some comfort. Alice, Alice, I won't forget it again. And now, which of these finger posts ought I to follow, I wonder? It was not a very difficult question to answer, as there was only one road through the wood, and the two finger posts both pointed along it. I'll settle it, Alice said to herself, when the roads divide and they point different ways. But this did not seem likely to happen. She went on and on, a long way, but whenever the road divided, there was sure to be two finger posts pointing the same way, one marked to Tweedledum's house, and the other to the house of Tweedledee. I do believe, said Alice at last, that they live in the same house. I wonder I never thought of that before. But I can't stay there long. I'll just call and say, how do you do, and ask them the way out of the wood. If I could only get to the 8th square before it gets dark. So she wandered on, talking to herself as she went on, till, on turning a sharp corner, she came upon two fat little men, so suddenly that she could not help staring back. But in another moment she recovered herself, feeling sure that they must be. Chapter 4. Jesse, Missions are dropping by, so I gotta head to work. Take care of me, Sharon's. Thanks for stopping in. What's up, everybody? Good night, Darker Bunnies. I appreciate you popping in. Tamer, how's it going? Nate! It's good to see you, Nate. How are you doing, son? I'm really happy you're here. It's our Monday night reading stream. Everybody, for those that don't know, Nate the Pokey Ghost is my son. It's really good to see you, son. Missions. Oh wow, he popped in. What's up, guys? Void. Yes, I made story time. What's up, Void? Doing good. Glad I could catch you. Had a good time. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We're just reading through the Looking Glass right now, which is part 2 of Alice's adventures. I'm starting to think that this one isn't in Wonderland. It's in Looking Glass World. Because the Red Queen in this one was not the Red Queen in the last one. Yeah, it's really good to see you. Yeah, we're just about to start chapter 4. Everybody feeling good so far? I think we're going to make 6 chapters tonight, y'all. I think we're going to make it. We normally been running about 2 hours, so I think we can make it. But yes, absolutely appreciate y'all being here. And son, it is really good to see you. And here we go. We are going through chapter 4, which is 2 of my favorite characters and characters of all time, Tweedledee and Tweedledum, or Tweedledum and Tweedledee. Yes, it's through the looking glass. I read a few papers on that so when I was still in high school or college. Excellent. Yep, through the looking glass. Incredible how much this drawing, like they really kind of nailed that illustration. They nailed those characters. Classics. Man, I love fantasy stories and I have to get in there for minutes, but oh yeah, no worries at all, son. If you gotta go, you can absolutely. Luckily, they were all recorded, but I am looking for more books from olden times to read after this one. This one should only be this stream and next Monday, so we're going to need to start looking for books, and I'll pull you guys and see what we think. 2 books would jam together for the Disney movie classic, yeah. Yep, sure was. Tweedledum and Tweedledee, Chapter 4. They were standing under a tree, each with an arm around the other's neck, and Alice knew which was which in the moment, because one of them had Dumb embroidered on its collar and the other D. I suppose they've each got Tweedle round the back of the collar, she said to herself. They stood so still that she quite forgot they were alive, and she was just going around to see if the word Tweedle was written on the back of each collar when she was startled by a voice coming from the one marked Dumb. "You think we're waxworks," he said. "You ought to pay, you know. Waxworks weren't made to be looked at for nothing now." "Contrariwise," added the one marked D, "if you think we're alive, you ought to speak." "I'm sure I'm very sorry," was all Alice could say, for the words of the old song kept ringing through her head like a ticking of a clock, and she could hardly help saying them out loud. Tweedledum and Tweedledee agreed to have a battle, for Tweedledum said Tweedledee had spoiled his nice new rattle. Just then flew down a mountain's crow, as black as a tar barrel, which frightened both the heroes so they quite forgot their quarrel. "I know that's what you're thinking about," said Tweedledum, "but it isn't so nohow. Contrariwise," continued Tweedledee, "if it was so, it mightn't be, and if it were so, it would be. But as it isn't, it ain't. That's logic." "I was thinking," Alice said very politely, "which is the best way out of this wood? It's getting so dark. Would you tell me, please?" But the fat little men only looked at each other and grinned. They looked so exactly like a couple of great schoolboys that Alice couldn't help pointing her finger at Tweedledum and saying, "First boy." "No how?" Tweedledum cried out briskly and shut his mouth up again with a snap. "Next boy," said Alice, passing on to Tweedledee, though she felt quite certain he would only shout out, "Contrariwise." And so he did. "You've begun wrong," cried Tweedledum. "The first thing in a visit is to say, 'How do you do?' and shake hands." And here the 2 brothers gave each other a hug, and then they held out 2 hands that were free to shake hands with her. Alice did not like shaking hands with either of them first, for fear of hurting the other's feelings, so best way out of the difficulty, she took hold of both hands at once. The next moment, they were dancing around in a ring. This seemed quite natural, she remembered afterwards, and she was not even surprised to hear music playing. It seemed to come from the tree which they were dancing under, and it was done, as well as they could make out, by the branches rubbing one across the other like fiddles on fiddlesticks. But it certainly was funny, Alice said afterward, when she was telling her sister the history of all this. "To find myself singing, 'Here we go round the mulberry bush.' I don't know when I began it, but somehow I felt as if I'd been singing it a long, long time." The other 2 dancers were fat, and very soon out of breath. 4 times round is enough for one dance, Tweedledum panted out, and they left off dancing as suddenly as they'd begun. The music stopped at the same moment. Then they let go of Alice's hands and stood looking at her for a moment. There was a rather awkward pause, as Alice didn't know how to begin the conversation with people she had just been dancing with. It would never do to say, "How do you do now?" she said to herself. We seem to have got beyond that somehow. "I hope you're not much tired," she said at last. "No how. And thank you very much for asking," said Tweedledum. "So much obliged," added Tweedledee. "You like poetry?" "Yes, pretty well. Some poetry," Alice said doubtfully. "Would you tell me which road leads out of the wood?" "What shall I repeat to her?" said Tweedledee, looking around at Tweedledum with great solemn eyes and not noticing Alice's question. "The Walrus and the Carpenter is the longest," Tweedledum replied, giving his brother an affectionate hug. Tweedledee began instantly. "The sun was shining." Here Alice ventured to interrupt him. "If it's very long," she said, as politely as she could, "would you please tell me first which road?" Tweedledee smiled gently and began again. "The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all its might. He did his very best to make the billows smooth and bright, and this was odd because it was the middle of the night. The moon was shining sulkily because she thought the sun had got no business to be here after the day was done. It's very rude of him," she said, "to come and spoil the fun. The sea was wet as wet could be, the sands were dry as dry. You could not see a cloud because no cloud was in the sky. No birds were flying overhead, there were no birds to fly. The Walrus and the Carpenter were walking close at hand. They wept like anything to see such quantities of sand. If this were only cleared away, they said, it would be grand. If 7 maids with 7 mops swept it for half a year, do you suppose, the Walrus said, they could get it clear? I doubt it, said the Carpenter, and shed a bitter tear. O oysters, come and walk with us, the Walrus did beseech. A pleasant walk, a pleasant talk along the briny beach. We cannot do with more than 4 to give a hand to each. The eldest oyster looked at him, but never a word he said. The eldest oyster winked his eye and shook his heavy head, meaning to say he did not choose to leave his oyster bed. But 4 young oysters hurried up, all eager for the treat. Their coats were brushed, their faces washed, their shoes were clean and neat. And this was odd because, they hadn't any feet. 4 other oysters followed them, and yet another 4. And thick and fast they came at last, and more and more and more, all hopping through the frothy waves and scrambling to the shore. The Walrus and the Carpenter walked on a mile or so, and then they rested on a rock conveniently low, and all the little oysters stood and waited in a row. The time has come, the Walrus said, to talk of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot, and whether pigs have wings. But wait a bit, the oysters cried, before we have our chat, for some of us are out of breath, and all of us are fat. No hurry, said the Carpenter. Ah, and they thanked him much for that. A loaf of bread, the Walrus said, is what we chiefly need. Pepper and vinegar, besides, are very good indeed. Now, if you're ready, oyster dears, we can begin to feed. But not on us, the oysters cried, turning a little blue. After such kindness, that would be a dismal thing to do. The night is fine, the Walrus said. Do you admire the view? It was so kind of you to come, and you are very nice. The Carpenter said nothing but, cut us another slice. I wish you weren't quite so deaf, I had to ask you twice. It seems a shame, the Walrus said, to play them such a trick after we brought them out so far and made them trot so quick. The Carpenter said nothing, but the butter spread too thick. I weep for you, the Walrus said. I deeply sympathize with sobs and tears he sorted out, those of the largest size, holding his pocket handkerchief before his streaming eyes. Oh, oysters, said the Carpenter. You've had a pleasant run. Shall we be trotting home again? But answer there came none, and this was scarcely odd because they had eaten every one. I like the Walrus best, said Alice, because he was a little sorry for the poor oysters. He ate more than the Carpenter, though, said Tweedledee. You see, he held his handkerchief in front, so the Carpenter wouldn't count how many he took, contrary-wise. That was mean, Alice said indignantly. Then I like the Carpenter best, if he didn't eat so many as the Walrus. But he ate as many as he could, said Tweedledum. This was a puzzler. After a pause, Alice began. Well, they were both very unpleasant characters. Here she checked herself in some alarm at hearing something that sounded to her like the puffing of a large steam engine in the wood near them, though she feared it was more likely to be a wild beast. Are there any lions and tigers out here? She asked timidly. It's only the Red King snoring, said Tweedledee. Come and look at him, the brothers cried, and they each took one of Alice's hands and led her to where the king was sleeping. Isn't he a lovely sight? Said Tweedledum. Alice couldn't say honestly that he was. He had a tall red nightcap on with a tassel, and he was laying crumpled up onto a sort of untidy heap and snoring loud. Fit to snore his head off, as Tweedledum remarked. I'm afraid he'll catch cold lying on the damp grass, said Alice, who was a very thoughtful little girl. He's dreaming now, said Tweedledee. And what do you think he's dreaming about? Alice said, nobody can guess that. Why, about you, Tweedledee exclaimed, clasping his hands triumphantly. And if he left off dreaming about you, where do you suppose you'd be? Where I am now, of course, said Alice. Not you, Tweedledee retorted contemptuously. You'd be nowhere. Why, you're only sort of thing in his dream. You're only a sort of thing in his dream. If that there king was to wake, said Tweedledum, you'd go out, bang, just like a candle. I shouldn't, Alice exclaimed indignantly. Besides, if I'm only a sort of thing in his dream, what are you? I should like to know. Ditto, said Tweedledum. Ditto, ditto, cried Tweedledee. He shouted this so loud that Alice couldn't help saying, Hush, you'll be waking him, I'm afraid, if you make too much noise. Well, it's no use your talking about waking him, said Tweedledum. When you're only one of the things in his dream, you know very well you're not real. I am real, said Alice, and began to cry. You won't make yourself a bit realer by crying, Tweedledee remarked. There's nothing to cry about. If I wasn't real, Alice thought, half laughing through her tears, it all seemed so ridiculous. I shouldn't be able to cry. I hope you don't suppose those are real tears, Tweedledum interrupted in a tone of great contempt. I know they're talking nonsense, Alice thought to herself, and it's foolish to cry about it. So she brushed away her tears and went on as cheerful as she could. At any rate, I'd better be getting out of the wood, for really it's coming on very dark. Do you think it's going to rain? Tweedledum spread a large umbrella over himself and his brother, and looked up into it. No, I don't think it is, he said. At least not under here, nohow. But it may rain outside? It may, if it chooses, said Tweedledee. I've no objection. Contra Roas. Selfish things, thought Alice, as and she was just going to say good night and leave them when Tweedledum sprang out from under the umbrella and seized her by the wrist. Do you see that? He said, in a voice choking with passion, and his eyes grew large and yellow all in a moment. As he pointed with a trembling finger at a small white thing lying under a tree. It's only a rattle, Alice said, after careful examination of the little white thing. Not a rattlesnake, you know, she added hastily, thinking he was frightened. Only a little rattle, quite old and broken. I knew it was, cried Tweedledum, beginning to stamp about wildly and tear at his hair. It's spoiled, of course. Here he looked at Tweedledee, who immediately sat down on the ground and tried to hide himself under the umbrella. Alice laid her hand upon his arm and said in a soothing tone, You needn't be so angry about an old rattle. But it isn't old, Tweedledum cried in a greater fury than ever. It's new, I tell you. I bought it yesterday. My nice new rattle. And his voice rose to a perfect scream. All this time Tweedledee was trying his best to fold up the umbrella with himself in it, which was an extraordinary thing to do. That it quite took off Alice's attention from the angry brother. But he couldn't quite succeed, and it ended up rolling over, bundled up in the umbrella, with only his head out, and there he lay, opening and shutting his mouth and his large eyes, looking more like a fish than anything else, Alice thought. Of course you agree to have a battle, Tweedledum said in a calmer tone. I suppose so, the other sulkily replied, as he crawled out of the umbrella. Only she must help us to dress up, you know. So the two brothers went off hand in hand into the wood and returned in a minute with their arms full of things, such as bolsters, blankets, hearth rugs, tablecloths, dish covers, and coal scuttles. I hope you're a good hand at pinning and tying strings, Tweedledum remarked. Every one of these things has got to go on somehow or another. Alice said afterward she had never seen such a fuss made about anything in all her life. The way those two bustle about, and the quantity of things they put on, and the trouble they gave her in tying strings and fastening buttons. Really, they'll be more like bundles of old clothes than anything else by the time they're ready, she said to herself as she arranged the bolsters round the neck of Tweedledee to keep his head from being cut off, as he said. You know, he added very gravely, it's one of the most serious things that can possibly happen to one in a battle, to get one's head cut off. Alice laughed loud, but she managed to turn it into a cough for fear of hurting his feelings. Do I look very pale? Said Tweedledum, coming up to have his helmet tied on. He called it a helmet, though it certainly looked much more like a saucepan. Well, yes, a little, Alice replied gently. I'm very brave generally, he went on in a low voice. Only today I happen to have a headache. And I've got a toothache, said Tweedledee, who had overheard the remark. I'm far worse than you. Then you'd better not fight today, said Alice, thinking it a good opportunity to make peace. We must have a bit of a fight, but I don't care about going long, said Tweedledum. What's the matter now? Tweedledee looked at his watch and said, 4:30. Let's fight till 6, and then have dinner, said Tweedledum. Very well, said the other rather sadly, and she can watch us. Only you'd better not come very close, he added. I generally hit anything that I see, when I get really excited. And I hit everything within reach, cried Tweedledum, whether I can see it or not. Alice laughed. You must hit trees pretty often, I should think, she said. Tweedledum looked around him with a satisfied smile. I don't suppose, he said, there will be a tree left standing for ever so far around by the time you finish. And all about a rattle, said Alice, still hoping to make them a little ashamed of fighting for such a trifle. I shouldn't have minded it so much, said Tweedledum, if it hadn't been a new one. I wish a monstrous crow would come, thought Alice. There's only one sword, you know, Tweedledum said to his brother, but you can have the umbrella. It's quite a sharp, only we must be getting quick. It's getting dark as it can. And darker, said Tweedledee. It was getting dark, so suddenly that Alice thought there must be a thunderstorm coming. What a thick black cloud that is, she said. And how fast it comes. Why, I do believe it's got wings. It's the crow, Tweedledum cried out in a shrill voice of alarm, and the two brothers looked to their heels and were out of sight in a moment. Took to their heels, sorry. Alice ran a little way into the wood and stopped under a large tree. It can never get me here, she thought. It's far too large to squeeze itself among the trees. But I wish it wouldn't flap its wings so. It makes quite a hurricane in the wood. Here's somebody's shawl being blown away. Tweedledum and Tweedledee. Doggy ears, you heard that. Or cabbages and canes. Prayer was the middle of the night. Indeed. Doggy ears, yep. Dog got up and decided to do a little takeoff. And then, drink half a gallon of water. Excellent. Glad to hear that, man. Chapter 5, Wool and Water. She caught the shawl as she spoke and looked about for the owner. In another moment, the White Queen came running wildly through the wood, with both arms stretched out wide as if she were flying, and Alice very civilly went to meet her with the shawl. I'm very glad I happened to be in the way, Alice said as she helped her to put her shawl on again. The White Queen only looked at her in a helpless, frightened sort of way, and kept repeating something in a whisper to herself that sounded like bread and butter, bread and butter. And Alice felt that if there was to be any conversation at all, she must manage it herself. So she began rather timidly. Am I addressing the White Queen? Well, yes, if you call that a dressing, the Queen said. It isn't my notion of a thing at all. Alice thought it would never do to have an argument at the beginning of their conversation, so she smiled and said, "If your Majesty will only tell me the right way to begin, I'll do as well as I can." "But I don't want it done at all," groaned the poor Queen. "I've been addressing myself for the last 2 hours." It would have been all the better, as she seemed to Alice, if she had got someone else to dress her. She was so dreadfully untidy. Every single thing's crooked, Alice thought to herself, and she's all over pins. "May I put your saw straight for you?" she added aloud. "I don't know what's the matter with it," the Queen said in a melancholy voice. "It's out of temper, I think. I've pinned it here and I've pinned it there, and there's no pleasing it. It can't go straight, you know, if you pin it all on one side," Alice said as she gently put it right for her. "And dear me, what a state your hair is in." "The brush has gotten tangled in it," the Queen said with a sigh, "and I lost the comb yesterday." Alice carefully released the brush and did her best to get her hair into order. "Come, you look rather better now," she said, after altering most of the pins. "But really, you should have a lady's maid." "I'm sure I'll take you with pleasure," the Queen said. 2 pence a week, and jam every other day." Alice couldn't help laughing as she said, "I don't want you to hire me, and I don't care for jam." "It's very good jam," said the Queen. "Well, I don't want any today, at any rate." "You couldn't have it if you did want it," the Queen said. "The rule is, jam tomorrow and jam yesterday, but never jam today." "It must come sometime to jam today," Alice objected. "No, it can't," said the Queen. "It's jam every other day. Today isn't other day, you know." "I don't understand you," said Alice. "It's dreadfully confusing." "That's the effect of living backwards," the Queen said kindly. "It always makes one a little giddy at first." "Living backwards," Alice repeated in great astonishment. "I never heard of such a thing." "But there's one great advantage in it. That's one's memory works both ways." "I'm sure mine only works one way," Alice remarked. "I can't remember things before they happen." "That's a poor sort of memory. That only works backwards," the Queen remarked. "What sort of things do you remember best?" Alice ventured to ask. "Oh, things that happened the week after next," the Queen replied in a careless tone. "For instance, now," she went on, sticking a large piece of plaster on her finger as she spoke, "there's the King's messenger. He's in prison now, being punished, and the trial doesn't even begin till next Wednesday. And of course the crime comes last of all." "Suppose he never commits the crime," said Alice. "That would be all the better, wouldn't it?" said the Queen, as she bound the plaster round her finger with a bit of ribbon. Alice felt there was no denying that. "Of course it would be all better," she said, "but it wouldn't be all better his being punished." "You're wrong there, at any rate," said the Queen. "Were you ever punished?" "Only for faults," said Alice. "And you were all the better for it, I know," the Queen said triumphantly. "Yes, but then I had done the things I was punished for," said Alice. "That makes all the difference." "But if you hadn't done them," the Queen said, "that would have been better still. Better and better and better." Her voice went higher with each better, till it got quite to a squeak at last. Alice was just beginning to say, "There's a mistake somewhere," when the Queen began screaming so loud that she had to leave the sentence unfinished. "Oh, oh, oh!" shouted the Queen, shaking her hand about as if she wanted to shake it off. "My finger's bleeding! Oh, oh, oh!" Her screams were so exactly like the whistle of a steam engine that Alice had to hold both her hands over her ears. "What is the matter?" she said, as soon as there was a chance of making herself heard. "Have you pricked your finger?" "I haven't pricked it yet," the Queen said, "but I soon shall. Oh, oh, oh!" "When do you expect to do that?" Alice asked, feeling very much inclined to laugh. "When I fasten my shawl again," the poor Queen groaned out. "The brooch will come undone directly. Oh, oh!" As she said that, with the words, the brooch flew open, and the Queen clutched wildly at it, trying to clasp it again. "Take care!" cried Alice. "You're holding it all crooked." And she caught at the brooch, but it was too late. The pin had slipped, and the Queen had pricked her finger. "That accounts for the bleeding, you see," she said to Alice with a smile. Now you understand the way things happen here? But why don't you scream now? Alice asked, holding her hands ready to put it over her ears again. Why, I've done all the screaming already, said the Queen. What would be the good of having it all over again? By this time, it was getting late. The crow must have flown away, I think, said Alice. I'm so glad it's gone. I thought it was the night coming on. I wish I could manage to be glad, the Queen said, only I never can remember the rule. You must be very happy living in this wood, and being glad wherever you like. Only it is so very lonely here, Alice said in a melancholy voice, and at that thought of her loneliness, 2 large tears came rolling down her cheeks. Oh, don't go on like that, cried the poor Queen, wriggling her hands in despair. Consider what a great girl you are. Consider what a long way you've come today. Consider what o'clock it is. Consider anything, only don't cry. Alice could not help laughing at this, even in the midst of her tears. Can you keep from crying by considering things? She asked. That's the way it's done, the Queen said with great decision. Nobody can do 2 things at once, you know. Let's consider your age to begin with. How old are you? I'm 7.5 exactly. You needn't say actually. Yeah, exactually, the Queen remarked. I can believe it without that. Now I'll give you something to believe. I'm just 101 5 months and a day. I can't believe that, said Alice. Can't you? The Queen said in a pitying tone. Try again. Draw a long breath and shut your eyes. Alice laughed. There's no use trying, she said. One can't believe impossible things. I dare say you haven't had much practice, said the Queen. When I was your age, I always did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. There goes the shawl again. The brooch came undone as she spoke, and a sudden gust of wind blew the Queen's shawl across the little brook. The Queen spread out her arms again and went flying after it, and this time she succeeded in catching it for herself. I've got it, she cried in a triumphant tone. Now you shall see me pin it on again, all by myself. Then I hope your finger is better now, Alice said very politely as she crossed the little brook after the Queen. Oh, much better, cried the Queen, her voice rising into a squeak as she went on. Much better, 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 better. The last word ended in a long bleat, so like a sheep that Alice quite started. She looked at the Queen, who seemed to have suddenly wrapped herself up in wool. Alice rubbed her eyes and looked again. She couldn't make out what had happened at all. Was she in a shop? And was it really a sheep that was sitting on the other side of the counter? Rubbish she would, she could not make nothing more of it. She was in a little dark shop, leaning with her elbows on the counter, and opposite to her was an old sheep, sitting in an armchair, knitting, every now and then leaving off to look at her through a great pair of spectacles. What is it you want to buy? The sheep said at last, looking up for a moment from her knitting. I don't quite know yet, Alice said very gently. I should like to look around me first, if I might. You may look in front of you, and on both sides, if you like, said the sheep, but you can't look all around you, unless you've got eyes in the back of your head. But these, as it happened, Alice had not got, so she contented herself with turning round, looking at the shelves as she came to them. The shop seemed to be full of all manner of curious things, but the oddest part of it all was that whenever she looked hard at any shelf to make out exactly what it had on it, that particular shelf was always quite empty, though the others round it were crowded as full as they could be held. Things flown about so here, she said at last in a plaintive tone, after she had spent a minute or 2 vainly pursuing a large bright thing that looked sometimes like a doll and sometimes like a workbox. She was always in the shelf next, above the one she was looking at. And this one is the most provoking of all. But I'll tell you what, she added, and a sudden thought struck her. I'll follow it up to the very top of it all. It'll puzzle it to go through the ceiling, I'll expect. But even this plan failed. The thing went through the ceiling as quietly as possible, as if it were quite used to it. Are you a child or a teacher?
petit-toton, the sheep said. She took up another pair of needles. You'll make me giddy soon if you go on turning around like that. She was now working with 14 pairs at once, and Alice couldn't help looking at her in great astonishment. How can she knit with so many? The puzzled child thought to herself, she gets more and more like a porcupine every minute. Can you row? The sheep asked, handing her a pair of knitting needles as she spoke. Yes, a little, but not on land and not with needles. Alice was beginning to say when suddenly the needles turned into oars in her hands, and she found they were in a little boat, gliding along between banks, so there was nothing for it but to do her best. Yo, this scene is getting crazy. Oh, Feather, cried the sheep, as she took up another pair of needles. This didn't sound like a remark that needed any answer, so Alice said nothing, but pulled away. There was something very queer about the water, she thought, as every now and then the oars got faster in it and would hardly come out again. Feather, Feather, the sheep cried again, taking more needles. You'll be catching a crab directly. A dear little crab, thought Alice. I should like that. Didn't you hear me say feather? The sheep cried angrily, taking up quite a bunch of needles. Indeed I did, said Alice. You've said it very often and very loud. Please, where are the crabs? In the water, of course, said the sheep, sticking some of the needles into her hair, as her hands were full. Feather, I say. Why do you say feather so often? Alice asked at last, rather vexed. I am not a bird. You are, said the sheep. You're a little goose. This offended Alice a little, so there was no more conversation for a minute or two, while the boat glided gently on. Sometimes among beds of weeds, which made the oars stick fast in the water worse than ever, and sometimes under trees, but always with the same tall river banks frowning over their heads. Oh, please, there are some scented rushes, Alice cried in a sudden transport of delight. There really are, and such beauties. You needn't say please to me about them, the sheep said, without looking up from her knitting. I didn't put them there, and I'm not going to take them away. No, but I meant, please, may we wait and pick some, Alice pleaded, if you don't mind stopping the boat for a minute. How am I to stop it? Said the sheep. If you leave off rowing, it'll stop itself. So the boat was left to drift down the stream as it would, till it glided gently in among the weaving rushes. And then the little sleeves were carefully rolled up, and the little arms were plucked in elbow deep to get a hold of the rushes and a good long way down before breaking them off. And for a while Alice forgot all about the sheep and the knitting, as she bent over the side of the boat, with just the ends of her tangled hair dipping into the water, while the bright, eager eyes she caught at one bunch after another of the darling scented rushes. I only hope the boat won't topple over, she said to herself. Oh, what a lovely one! Only I couldn't quite reach it, and it certainly did seem a little provoking, almost as if it happened on purpose, she thought. Though she managed to pick plenty of beautiful rushes as the boat glided on, there was always a more lovely one that she couldn't reach. The prettiest are always further, she said at last, with a sigh, at the obscenity of the rushes and growing so far off, as with flushed cheeks and dipping her hair in hands, she scrambled back into her place, and began to arrange her newfound treasures. What mattered it to her just then, that the rushes had begun to fade, and to lose all the scent and beauty from the very moment that she picked them. Even real scented rushes, you know, last only a very little while, and these, being dream rushes, melted away almost like snow, as they lay in heaps at her feet. But Alice hardly noticed this. There were so many other curious things to think about. They hadn't gone much further before the blade of one of the oars got fast in the water and wouldn't come out again. So Alice explained it afterward. And the consequence was that the handle of it caught her under the chin, and, in spite of a series of little shrieks of "Oh, oh, oh!" from poor Alice, it swept straight off the seat and down among the heap of rushes. However, she wasn't a bit hurt. and was soon up again. The sheep went on with her knitting all the while, just as if nothing happened. "That was a nice crab you caught," she remarked, as Alice got back into her place, very much relieved to find herself still in the boat. "Was it? I didn't see it," said Alice, peeping cautiously over the side of the boat into the dark water. "I wish I hadn't let go. I should so like a little crab to take home with me." But the sheep only laughed scornfully and went on with her knitting. "Are there many crabs here?" said Alice. "Crabs, and all sorts of things," said the sheep. "Plenty of choice. Only make up your mind. Now, what do you want to buy?" "To buy?" Alice echoed in a tone that was half astonished and half frightened, for the oars and the boat and the river had vanished all in a moment, and she was back again in the little dark shop. "I should like to buy an egg, please," she said timidly. "How do you sell them?" "5 farthing for one, 2 for 2, the sheep replied. "Then 2 are cheaper than 1? Alice said in a surprised tone, taking out her purse. "You only must eat them both if you buy 2, said the sheep. "Then I'll have 1, please," said Alice as she put the money down on the counter, for she thought to herself, "They mightn't be all that nice, you know." The sheep took the money and put it away in a box. Then she said, "I never put things into people's hands. That would never do. You must get it yourself." And so saying, she went off to the other end of the shop and set the egg upright on a shelf. "I wonder why it wouldn't do," thought Alice, as she groped her way among the tables and chairs, for the shop was very dark toward the end. "The egg seems to get farther away the more she walks towards it. Let me see. Is this a chair? Why, it's got branches, I declare. How very odd to find trees growing here. And actually, here's a little brook. Well, this is the very queerest shop I've ever saw." So she went on, wondering more and more at every step, as everything turned into a tree the moment she came up to it, and she quite expected the egg to do the same. Okay, that makes sense now, but that was an odd little chapter, I'm not gonna lie. Glory! That was an odd little chapter. Yeah, and we're right on par, too. We're just about to start that chapter, so great chapter, right? It was just very bouncy back and forth. And I can't help but just, see, an actual boat. There was some pictures back here. Take a look real quick. Looking at Alice, a little dark shop. But we're going to see what that little egg was. And that makes a lot of sense, because chapter 6 and our last chapter tonight, y'all, is going to be Humpty Dumpty. That's the chapter 6. Oh, cool, I love it. With detail little pictures. Oh, yeah, me too. And these are some of the greatest little pictures in them, too. Got little Humpty Dumpty. Yep. Very well done. And, of course, you all know, I love the art. Humpty Dumpty. We do know something great about Humpty Dumpty, and that is he had a great fall. Let's find out more. However, the egg only got larger and larger and more human. When she had come within a few yards of it, she saw it had eyes and a nose and a mouth, and when she had come close to it, she saw clearly that it was Humpty Dumpty himself. "It can't be anybody else," she said to herself. "I am certain of it," as if his name were written all over his face. It might have been written 100 times easily on the enormous face. Humpty Dumpty was sitting, with his legs crossed like turf, on top of a high wall, such a narrow one that Alice quite wondered how he could keep his balance, and his eyes were steadily fixed on the opposite direction, and he didn't take at least notice of her. She thought he might be a stuffed figure after all. "And how exactly like an egg he is," she said out loud, standing with her hands ready to catch him, for She was every moment expecting him to fall. "It's very provoking," Humpty Dumpty said after a long silence, looking away from Alice as he spoke. "To be called an egg? Very." "I said you looked like an egg, sir," Alice gently explained, "and some eggs are very pretty, you know," she added, hoping to turn her remark into sort of a compliment. "Some people," said Humpty Dumpty, looking away from her as usual, "have more sense than a baby." Alice didn't know what to say to this. It wasn't at all like conversation she thought, as he never said anything to her. In fact, his last remark was evidently addressed to a tree. So she stood softly, repeated to herself, "Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty in his place again." "That last line is much too long for the poetry," she added, almost out loud, forgetting that Humpty Dumpty would hear her. "Don't stand chattering to yourself like that," Humpty Dumpty said, looking at her for the first time. "But tell me your name and your business." "My name is Alice, but—" "It's a stupid name enough," Humpty Dumpty interrupted impatiently. "What does it mean?" "Must a name mean something?" Alice asked doubtfully. "Of course it must," Humpty Dumpty said with a short laugh. "My name means the shape I am. And a good handsome shape it is, too. With a name like yours, you might be any shape almost." "Why do you sit out here all alone?" said Alice, not wishing to begin an argument. "Why, because there's nobody with me," cried Humpty Dumpty. "Did you think I didn't know the answer to that? Ask another." "Don't you think you'd be safer down on the ground?" Alice went on, not with any idea of making another riddle, but simply in her good-natured anxiety for the queer creature. "That wall is very narrow." "What tremendously easy riddles you ask," Humpty Dumpty growled out. "Of course I don't think so. Why, if I ever did fall off, which there's no chance of, but if I did—" Here he pursed his lips and looked so solemn and grand that Alice could hardly help laughing. "If I did fall," he went on, "the king has promised me—" "Ah, you may turn pale if you like. You didn't think I was going to say that, did you? "The king has promised me, with his very own mouth, to send all his horses and his men," Alice interrupted rather unwisely. "I declare that's too bad," Humpty Dumpty cried, breaking into a sudden passion. "You've been listening at doors and behind trees and down chimneys, or you couldn't have known that." "I hadn't indeed," Alice said very gently. "It's in a book." "Ah, well, they may write such things in a book," Humpty Dumpty said in a calmer tone. "That's what you call a history of England, that is. Now, take a good look at me. I'm one that has spoken to a king. I am. Mayhap you will never see such another. And to show you I'm not proud, you may shake hands with me." And he grinned almost from ear to ear as he leaned forward, and as nearly as possible fell off the wall in doing so, and offered Alice's hand. She watched him a little anxiously as she took it. If he smiled much more, the ends of his mouth might meet behind, she thought, and then I don't know what would happen to his head. I'm afraid it would come off. "Yes, all his horses and all his men," Humpty Dumpty went on. "They'd pick me up in a minute, they would. However, this conversation is going on a little too fast. Let's back to the last remark but one." "I'm afraid I can't quite remember it," Alice said very politely. "In that case, we'll start afresh," said Humpty Dumpty, "and it's my turn to choose a subject." He talks about it just as if it were a game, thought Alice. "So here's a question for you. How old did you say you were?" Alice made a short calculation and said, 7 years and 6 months. "Wrong," Humpty Dumpty exclaimed triumphantly. "You never said a word like it." "I thought you meant how old are you?" Alice explained. "If I'd meant that, I'd have said it," said Humpty Dumpty. Alice didn't want to begin another argument, so she said nothing. 7 years and 6 months, Humpty Dumpty repeated thoughtfully. "An uncomfortable sort of age. Now, if you'd asked my advice, I'd have said leave off at 7, but it's too late now." "I never asked advice about growing," Alice said indignantly. "Too proud?" the other inquired. Alice felt even more indignant at this suggestion. "I mean," she said, "that one can't help growing older." One can't, perhaps, said Humpty Dumpty, but two can. With proper assistance, you might have left off at 7. What a beautiful belt you've got on, Alice suddenly remarked. They had had quite enough of the subject of age, she thought, and if they really were to take turns in choosing subject, it was her turn now. At least, she corrected herself on second thoughts, a beautiful cravat. I should have said, no, a belt, I beg your pardon, she added in dismay, for Humpty Dumpty looked thoroughly offended, and she began to wish she hadn't chosen that subject. If only I knew, she thought to herself, which was neck and which was waist. Evidently, Humpty Dumpty was very angry, though he said nothing for a minute or two. When he did speak again, it was in a deep growl. It is a most provoking thing, he said at last, when a person doesn't know a cravat from a belt. I know it's very ignorant of me, Alice said, in so humble a tone that Humpty Dumpty relented. It's a cravat, child, and a beautiful one, as you say. It's a present from the White King and Queen, there now. Is it really? Said Alice, quite pleased to find that she had chosen a good subject after all. They gave it to me, Humpty Dumpty continued thoughtfully, as he crossed one knee over the other and clasped his hands around it. They gave it to me for an unbirthday present. I beg your pardon, Alice said with a puzzled air. I'm not offended, said Humpty Dumpty. I mean, what is an unbirthday present? A present when it's your birthday, when it isn't your birthday, of course. Alice considered a little. I like birthday presents best, she said at last. You don't know what you're talking about, cried Humpty Dumpty. How many days are there in a year? 365, said Alice. And how many birthdays have you? 1. And if you take 1 from 365, what remains? 364, of course. Humpty Dumpty looked doubtful. I'd rather see that done on paper, he said. Alice couldn't help smiling as she took out her memorandum book and worked the sum for him. Humpty Dumpty took the book and looked at it carefully. That seems to be done right, he began. You're holding it upside down, Alice interrupted. To be sure I was, Humpty Dumpty said gaily, as she turned it round for him. I thought it looked a little queer. As I was saying, that seems to be done right, though I haven't time to look it over thoroughly just now, and that shows there are 364 days when you might get unbirthday presents. Certainly, said Alice, and only 1 for birthday presents, you know. There's glory for you. I don't know what you mean by glory, Alice said. Humpty Dumpty smiled contemptuously. Of course you don't, till I tell you. I meant, there's a nice knockdown argument for you. But glory doesn't mean a nice knockdown argument, Alice objected. When I use a word, Humpty Dumpty said in a rather scornful tone, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. The question is, Alice said, whether you can make words mean so many different things. The question is, said Humpty Dumpty, which is to be master, that's all. Alice was much puzzled to say anything, so after a minute Humpty Dumpty began again. They're of a temper, some of them, particularly verbs. They're the proudest. Adjectives, you can do anything with them, but not verbs. However, I can manage a whole lot of them, impenetrably. That's what I say. Would you tell me, please, said Alice, what that means? Now you talk like a reasonable child, said Humpty Dumpty, looking very much pleased. I meant by impenetrably, impenetrability, that we've had enough of that subject. And it would be just as well if you'd mentioned what you mean to do next, as I suppose you don't mean to stop here all the rest of your life. That's a great deal to make one word mean, Alice said in a thoughtful tone. When I make a word do a lot of work like that, said Humpty Dumpty, I always pay it extra. Oh, said Alice. She was much too puzzled to make any other remark. Ah, you should see 'em come round me of a Saturday night, Humpty Dumpty went on, wagging his head gravely from side to side. For to get their wages, you know. Alice didn't venture to ask what he paid them with, and so, you see, I can't tell you. You seem very clever at explaining words, sir. said Alice. Would you kindly tell me the meaning of the poem called Jabberwocky? Let's hear it, said Humpty Dumpty. I can explain all the poems that were ever invented, and a good many that haven't been invented just yet. This sounded very hopeful, so Alice repeated the first verse. 'Twas brilling, and the slithy toves did gyre, and the grimble in the wave. The mimsy were the bottom groves, and the mome wraths outgrabe. That's enough to begin with, Humpty Dumpty interrupted. There are plenty of hard words there. Brilling means 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the time when you begin boiling things for dinner. That'll do very well, said Alice. And slithy? Well, slithy means lithe and slimy. Lithe is the same as active, you see. It's like portmanteau. There are 2 meanings packed into one word. I see it now, Alice remarked thoughtfully. And what are toves? Well, toves are something like badgers. There's something like lizards, and there's something like corkscrews. They must be very curious-looking creatures. That they are, said Humpty Dumpty. Also, they make their nests under sundials. Also, they live on cheeks. And what's to gyre and gimble? To gyre is to go around like a gyroscope. To gimble is to make holes like a gimlet. And the wabe is the grass plot round the sundial, I suppose, said Alice, surprised at her own ingenuity. Of course it is. It's called wabe, you know, because it goes a long way before it and the long way behind it. And a long way beyond it on each side, Alice added. Exactly so. Well then, mimsy is flimsy and miserable. There's another portmanteau for you. And the borogrove is a thin, shabby-looking bird with its feathers sticking out all around, something like a live mop. And then mome wraths? Said Alice. I'm afraid I'm giving you a great deal of trouble. Well, a wrath is a sort of green pig, but mome, I'm not certain about. I think it's short for from home, meaning they lost their way, you know. And what does outgrabe mean? Well, outgreebing is something between bellowing and whistling, with a kind of sneeze in the middle. However, you'll hear it done maybe down in the wood yonder. And when you've heard it once, once you've heard it, you'll be quite content. Who's been repeating all the hard stuff to you? I read it in a book, said Alice, but I had some poetry repeated to me much easier than that, by Tweedledee, I think it was. As to poetry, you know, said Humpty Dumpty, stretching out one of his great hands, I can repeat poetry as well as other folks, if it comes to that. Oh, it needn't come to that, Alice hastily said, hoping to keep him from beginning. The piece I'm going to repeat, he went on, without noticing her remark, was written entirely for your amusement. Alice felt that, in this case, she really ought to listen to it, so she sat down and said thank you rather sadly. In winter, when the fields are white, I sing this song for your delight. Only I don't sing it, he added as an explanation. I see you don't, said Alice. If you can see whether I'm singing it or not, you've sharper eyes than most. Humpty Dumpty remarked severely. Alice was silent. In spring, when woods are getting green, they'll try and tell you what I mean. Thank you very much, said Alice. In summer, when the days are long, perhaps you'll understand the song. In autumn, when the leaves are brown, take pen and ink and write it down. I will if I can remember it so long, said Alice. You needn't go on making remarks like that, Humpty Dumpty said. They're not sensible, and they put me out. I sent a message to the fish. I told him, this is what I wish. The little fishes of the sea, they sent an answer back to me. The little fish's answer was, we cannot do it, sir, because... I'm afraid I don't quite understand, said Alice. It gets easier further on, Humpty Dumpty replied. I sent to them again to say, it will be better to obey. The fishes answered with a grin, why, what a temper you are in. I told them once, I told them twice, they would not listen to advice. I took a kettle large and new, fit for the deed I had to do. My heart went hot, my heart went thump, I filled the kettle at the pump. Then someone came to me and said, the little fishes are in bed. I said to them, I said in plain, then you mustn't wake them up again. Then you must wake them up again. I said it very loud and clear. I went and shouted in his ear. Humpty Dumpty raised his voice almost to a scream as he repeated this verse, and Alice thought, with a shudder, I wouldn't have been the messenger for anything. But he was very stiff and proud. He said, "You needn't shout so loud." And he was very proud and stiff and said, I'd go and wake them if. I took a corkscrew from the shelf and went to wake them up myself. And when I found the door was locked, I pulled and pushed and kicked and knocked. And when I found the door was shut, I tried to turn the handle, but there was a long pause. Is that all? Alice timidly asked. That's all, said Humpty Dumpty. Goodbye. This was rather sudden, Alice thought, but after such a very strong hint that she ought to be going, she felt it would hardly be civil to stay. So she got up and held out her hand. Goodbye, till we meet again, she said as cheerfully as she could. I shouldn't know you again if we did meet, Humpty Dumpty replied in a discontented tone, giving her one of his fingers to shake. You're so exactly like other people. The face is what goes by generally. The face is what one goes by generally, Alice remarked in a thoughtful tone. That's just what I complain of, said Humpty Dumpty. Your face is the same as everybody has, the two eyes, so making their places in the air with his thumbs, nose in the middle, mouth under. It's always the same. Now, if you had the two eyes on the same side of the nose, for instance, or the mouth at the top, that would be of some help. It wouldn't look so nice, Alice objected, but Humpty Dumpty only shut his eyes and said, Wait till you've tried. Alice went on a minute to see if he would speak again, but as he never opened his eyes or took any further notice of her, she said goodbye once more, and getting no answer to this, she quietly walked away. But as she couldn't help saying to herself as she went on, of all the unsatisfactory, she repeated this aloud, as it was a great comfort to have such a long word to say. Of all the unsatisfactory people I have ever met. She never finished the sentence, for at this moment a heavy crash shook the forest from end to end. Ooh. And that's the end of chapter 6. Alright, gotta head out for the night. Have a great night, stream. Love you, Dad. Love you too, son. I appreciate you popping in. What's up, Cameron? How you doing tonight? I hope you all enjoyed the first 6 chapters there. Some were a little rough there. My eyes were playing tricks on me. Not the easiest book to read, and the man's grammar was not great. But I hope you all enjoyed that. Just past the 2-hour mark. That was perfect. Next Monday we'll finish the book. We'll do the last 6 chapters. And then we'll start looking for the next one. Perfect timing. I was just about to tell y'all. Gonna see? That's what I'm saying, man. That 2-hour mark is just like that perfect little timing to end it. So with that, I know that I probably still have a couple mods here. I know this isn't really well, thanks, JB. I appreciate you, fam. I truly do. I appreciate you being here. And I appreciate you all being here and listening and sharing this story with me. It's a very, very special story, and you know, a lot of these things did come out in other ways in the movie, and it's funny to hear that they were said by other people. That was great. Oh, I appreciate that, Jess. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your night at Matty G, if he's hanging around, if he hadn't knocked out yet. I love the eggs. I just saw the eggs. I said, that looks silly. Greatly drawn. He looks pretty silly. He does look pretty silly. So yeah, I appreciate you guys being here. Wow, 13 of y'all in here. I'll have to rewatch. I love this. Thank you, Kat. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you, Alice. No worries at all. It will be readily available as soon as we're done. You as well. It was great. Passed out. I could only imagine. Well, it's not too... Oh, 9 your time. Okay. Okay, that makes sense. But no, I really hope that you guys have a beautiful rest of your night. I reckon we could go and raid somebody, to be quite honest with you, if Bro Rips is still on. I was just going to go back there anyway, so if you guys want to come back with me to Bro Rips, if somebody wants to grab that link and drop it, I would greatly appreciate it. But honestly, if you're going to raid your pillows, that's even better.
do not have to come to the raid, just letting you all know my plans. But I hope you all have a beautiful rest of your night. Come and join us. I might do a pop-up stream again this week. I'm off all week, so who knows. And I got some mail to go through. So, but I do appreciate you guys being here. Come back next week, and or this week, when we do our Pokemon streams, and come and make theories with us and appreciate the art. But as always, get everything you set out to get. Just always remember to do it through peace, love, and Pokemon, y'all. And I really appreciate you. Let me see if I can grab that link real quick. You as well, JB. You as well. I'll see you around, fam, for sure. Awesome. Thank you, Haley. Appreciate you. Let's read before bed to get your name out. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Of course, this person is going to know my name very, very well. Can't join, but have a great night. Yes, you as well. Go ahead and click that link, y'all. Let's go surprise bro. It's actually his birthday tomorrow. So let's go and say happy born day, bro. Ghost raid. Off the story raid. So story time, ghost raid is what I say. But I really appreciate y'all and hope you have a beautiful rest of your night. Peace out, y'all.